welcome to a WoW podcast, obviously episode number
11.
11. Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to the show. Let me find the camera. Yeah, it's us.
Yay. Hello.
We're here.
Hi.
Hello everyone.
Hi.
Welcome. It's lovely to be here. And lovely to have you here as well. And it's not just you that's here, Evie.
Oh, it's not just me?
No, today we have
Is there a third?
special guest. Do you remember the last special guest we got on? Our good friend Garrett.
Yes, I do.
Who I enjoyed our time with immensely, but
Oh, I
everyone was like,
always do.
why did you invite Garrett on? He doesn't even like WoW. He hates WoW. Why did you do that? Why did you invite him on? You're ruining your podcast by having Garrett on who hates WoW, even though he had a lot of very nice things to say about WoW and some very
did.
insightful
He
things
loves
to say
WoW.
about WoW. No, exactly. Like we ran a
Man
WoW
loves the
podcast
game.
together for a long, long time. But no, it's not just us, and we won't keep you waiting any longer because we have an absolute stonker of a guest on today. We have, from Folding Ideas, Dan Olson!
Hey.
He is placed above me.
So excited. Where is he?
Where did he go? Hold on.
Welcome to the show, Dan. I'm just going to wait until the chat tells me whether you're picking up on the mics or not and whether you're recording.
Yeah.
But I'm confident.
I'll give them some audio to grab onto. Hey, cats! No, leave each other alone.
Oh.
Go find couches to sit on and just fall asleep. You've been fed.
That's exactly how I talk to my children.
Yeah.
It's
exactly
so similar.
Oh, you
Except
can't
then they
enough.
start crying. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I feel guilt instantly. Like that's the thing about being a parent. And I don't know. I only ever had a cat when I was a kid, so I don't know what it's like as a grown up. But you know, there's that thing of juggling that tightrope of constantly kind of finding them annoying. And then guilt at finding them annoying and overcompensating them with like immense love that, you know, to compensate for the guilt, for the annoyance that you never even expressed to them, but you felt. So
Are you talking about your children or your ex-girlfriends right now? Because no, I totally feel that. However, our children do not come on camera, but Dan, your cats are definitely welcome on camera.
Oh yeah, any old time.
I'm just saying.
I didn't bring any of the production lights out into the basement, so it's like a cave down here. There's like I'm beneath my single bare light bulb, you know, writing manifestos and angry letters to the government.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know about Dan Olson, he is one of our favorite YouTubers, I want to say a big YouTube inspiration, but then it makes it sound like we try and make our videos like Dan Olson's videos, which, I mean, you know, secretly deep down, that's exactly what happens. That's every video I make, every kind of like WoW essay talking about the trading post or people being angry about, you know, the store mounts or something like that. What I'm secretly thinking in my head is, you know, this is a proper Dan Olson analysis, breakdown, dissection.
Like a profound cultural critique.
Exactly. Yeah.
Except we're talking
it
about.
never quite comes out that way, but that's on purpose. I want you to know that's entirely on purpose. I absolutely could. I could do it.
I mean, a lot of mine are that way as well, where I'll start inspired by like somebody else's voice, somebody else's. It's like you see somebody else doing something, you're like, oh man, like I wish I could do that, and you try to find like your own way of doing it, and maybe it comes out a little janky at first, but perfectly valid creative outlet.
So you've been on YouTube for an incredibly long time.
14 years.
That's insane.
Wow.
And what inspired you to kind of jump into the space and get started?
So prior to YouTube, okay, so I went to film school. Like, you know, it's a film school proper, Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. I was in the film and video production pipeline, which is it's a trade school, and the film program is very much designed around like preparing students to sort of feed directly into the Alberta film industry, which is sort of this like film service industry. A lot of stuff shoots up here, but it's all like cowboy movies from the States, you know, Legends of the Fall, River Runs Through It, Unforgiven, Brokeback, you know, all stuff like that. So
you just listed
that's
all
kind
my
of
favorite
intent.
movies. Well, that's
You know, we had Last of Us up here 2 years ago. No, longer. When did they shoot that?
Oh,
Time is meaningless.
nice.
Anyway, so I did that program, and you know, when I was in college, coincided with with YouTube becoming a platform. And so everybody had kind of had this sense that like web specific content, so not just stuff repurposed for the web, and not just home videos and like random one-off sort of like America's Funniest Home Videos kind of content. Everybody knew that like stuff created for the internet was an inevitability, right? We had already seen it in text for like you know, we already had a decade of people doing it in text with blogs and websites and et cetera, et cetera. Multimedia was just a matter of once there was enough bandwidth, once home computers were powerful enough, it was going to bust wide open. But nobody knew what form it was going to take. Nobody knew what was really going to like find an audience. And so I was paying a lot of attention to it. And you had sort of the early success of things like AVGN and oh dang it, I can't remember the name of it. It's not the Guild, the precursor to the Guild, which was this series of movies released directly to the internet about anyway. So like web specific content was a thing I was paying attention to. That guy with the glasses kind of takes off, and we get this whole like AVGN derivative reviewer sort of environment and red letter media and whatnot. And at this time, my first job out of college was working at a high school as a subject matter expert in so I was the AV tech and SME
Smee.
SME, so the SME. I was the AV tech and the SME for all of the multimedia. If students needed help with like video cameras or Premiere or Photoshop or whatever, I was the contact point for that, and I would like teach them how to do it. But I wasn't like, but I'm not a licensed teacher, so I would like instruct classes, but I can't give grades. Is sort of the differentiation there. But so right at this time, you know, we've got this wave of like the internet can do video now. And of course, this is when Facebook started their infamous pivot to video that wound up being a huge fraud, and killed Cracked.
R.I.P.
Rip.
But I'm jumping super fast through like 6 years of internet history here just to get so in this environment. I was watching a lot of web video. I was watching a lot of the reviews. I was absorbing all of this media criticism that was online, and I saw holes in it. I just saw that there were angles that weren't being covered. In particular, there was very much kind of derivative from AVGN and that guy with the glasses, this approach to film criticism of just like whenever something unusual happens, of just getting like angry or confused or both. And a lot of that was performative, but at the same time, it was just kind of this default that is like if something strange happened, you could rely on angry confusion as kind of red meat for your audience. And as somebody with actual like training in film and experience on film sets and whatnot, I was looking at this and going, it's like no, but there's a reason why it wound up that way. There's this very specific, like, you know, the pressures of creating a movie have aligned in such a way that like this is the decision that they made, and the story of how this wound up turning out bad is interesting. Like, why is the thing the way that it is? And it's like, and you can create entertaining content by like getting fantastically angry at something being confusing and bad, but there's also a really interesting story in actually just telling the truth. about like how did it end up this way? Why is it why? And so I saw that as kind of this hole that there wasn't that there wasn't really anyone at the time in 2010 um kind of taking it seriously, taking it at face value, and approaching things a little bit more pragmatically. So I decided that there was a hole that I could attempt to fill, and decided to throw my hat in the ring and create a channel. And then I didn't make a second video until 2011.
What was that first video? I should have looked this up. I should have made this my
So
research.
the first video was just about memes, like the Dawkins original sort of idea, and it's a very, very short sort of just thing on semiotics and memes, and how like TV evolved, where like the thesis, some of which hasn't aged great, was how Who Wants to Be a Millionaire created Jersey Shore.
Right. Yeah.
And just sort of this chain of like, it's like, okay, this thing was a success, and then something with like overlapping, so Who Wants to Be a Millionaire creates a primetime game show boom. In the primetime game show boom, you Survivor, which has like DNA a whole bunch, like from a whole bunch of other places around entertainment. Like Survivor's a big hit, and then Survivor allows for Big Brother to be a hit, and then Big Brother creates a niche for a. So parallel to this, you've got the OC, and then you end up with the synthesis show, which is Big Brother plus the OC, which is Real Housewives of Orange County. And then that ends up with a spin-off on the East Coast, and then that ends up with a spin-off, which is Jersey Shore.
That's
incredible.
Wild. And
it's
completely right.
And it's like, and that's just how the how fads and whatnot like happen. And it's a short little video, and there's some details in there that there's a couple jokes in there that I wouldn't tell if I were remaking it, but yeah.
Yeah, I've got a lot of videos like that. I think the first piece of your work that I came across myself was your video analyzing a scene from the movie Rent. Being a theatre kid myself, right? I stumbled across this, and I looked it up just again the other day, and I think that was 9 years ago now, that video as well.
It probably was. Yeah,
I guess it must have been. And it just kind of, got me down the rabbit hole of your videos, and I'd pop in, and if I saw a new upload, I'd come and check it out. And you went through that amazing kind of purple patch a few years ago where you got into a certain kind of video where you looked at sort of the Book of Henry and Suicide Squad, the editing in Suicide Squad and things like that. And I think, actually, thinking about it, I made a joke at the beginning of the show, but I think that somewhere deep down, I was trying to kind of emulate that kind of video. And there was a moment where we first started getting into the cinematic analysis videos, where, my grasp of kind of analysis and critique and understanding of things is incredibly low. And that's where I pitched those cinematic analysis videos. And I was so glad when they started getting traction, because it allowed me to live out my YouTube video essay kind of fantasies. I was like, look, to at least one or two people in this chat, I am Dan Olson. And that makes me feel pretty great.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. But then it came as a massive surprise when you released your classic video, Everything We Left Behind, when WoW Classic came out. To learn that you are a huge WoW player. Yeah,
I had been since I've been playing WoW basically unbroken since launch. It's kind of always in like the back of my mind of like, how do I, and people have commented that, or people have noticed that, like, I multiple times, even prior to that video, I would use World of Warcraft as like a reference point for something. So it would kind of get thrown in as like not quite an Easter egg, but like if I needed a detail that WoW was a good example of, I would use it. And then when Classic came out, there was this whole rush, and Nathan, who's now my co-writer, he was big on the like private realms. He had a lot of private realm experience, and so he was like really forward thinking in terms of his like the specific ways in which Classic was going to be unique. And so like the lineup for that one quest in Durotar, he's like there's going to be a line, like people are going to queue for it. I'm like, what do you mean people are going to queue for it? Like, no, it's just going to be a giant cloud. He's like, no, people are going to obey the social contract and queue for it. There will be a line out the back of the cave. And then sure enough, there was. So we spent a bunch of time in Classic, and around level 40 or so, I was like, you know what, there's something like really, really interesting going on here. I'm noticing something in myself about like the way that I'm engaging with it that is very like that is not inauthentic, but it is very, very different. I found that I was playing WoW in the same way that I would like play Final Fantasy, like not Final Fantasy 14, like Final Fantasy 12. You pop it in and it's this big giant sprawling game with like hundreds of hours of like main quest and side quest and all of this stuff to do, and all this stuff to wander around and see. But I was really approaching Classic as effectively a finished game. It's like here's a packaged single player experience with a multiplayer mode. And I thought that was really I thought that was fascinating to see in myself. And as I started then like engaging with other people in the community and looking, I saw that like I wasn't alone in that. There were other people who were treating it that way. I watched some streamers who I sought out like really casual streamers to just sort of like watch how they were playing the game, and they were playing it in a very sort of similar way. Like it's like, oh, let's pop in, like let's do a replay of Final Fantasy VII, which like the remake was in the news at the time, and I don't remember if it had come out yet, but but like it was kind of like on everyone's mind, this sort of thing. And so but then also like I was playing a lot of BFA. It was around the time that I had finally like really got into like Mythic Plus as a format, and was like, taking it like seriously and trying to get like all the end of season rewards, and Nathan had convinced me to try for to try for 1800 in arena, so in twos. And so I was playing a ton of retail and at the time, and had this really kind of great contrast between them in terms of like what are they doing as a game, what are the differences between them, and I thought that was a really, really interesting texture, because I knew that these sort of like this like launch experience of Classic wasn't going to hold. It's like we're in a really great sort of limited little like pocket here where everybody can feel a certain way about this thing, and it is going to unfortunately disintegrate like once instrumentalism kind of sets in, and it's going to set in very quickly. And so I was very conscious about like trying to get that video out at the perfect time where like the sentiment was still like in my favor, and I could be a little bit wistful and sentimental about it, and a little bit schmaltzy, and just kind of slide in the like, and then it's all going to fall apart because it's a solved problem that people are going to approach a certain way, and just kind of slide that in at the end. And then we wound up being 100% correct, and we were able to be a little bit more brutal with that when we made the instrumental play video.
And that was a perfect like follow on from it. And by kind of falling apart, kind of probably important to point out. You don't mean sort of like player numbers or anything like that, because Classic is still incredibly healthy and
yeah,
does
it's
great
Classic
business.
is doing fine. I think like Classic Hardcore was a brilliant product, was a brilliant play on their part. I think Classic Hardcore manages to hit a sort of perfect synthesis between the instrumental play, like the instrumental limitations of Classic and the things that appeal to people about Classic, by basically turning it into a spectator sport. You know, you have this like column of players and influencers who are willing to like engage with that instrumentalism, and then you have thousands of people who are like, you do you, but I will watch because I know that at any time, like, this could go comically like bad, and if it does, then like all hell's gonna break loose. And so like I think that's been an amazing sort of synthesis between those like pressures.
I think that's a great observation that you made about it feeling like you're playing Final Fantasy when you play Classic, because that's exactly the vibe that I get from it as well. This idea that the longevity of Classic and the reason it's still so popular now is, yeah, it is essentially you want an excuse to level up a new character from 0 to max and go through the same raids again. And so any kind of sort of change that gives you a reason and an excuse to do that, like Hardcore, like Season of Discovery, is a really good thing. And it is exactly like just whacking on Mario 64 for your kind of like yearly play of it. And you don't want it to be anything else, anything apart from that. But it's a guaranteed play, kind of like once a year, or when a new expansion comes out, or what have you.
But then the people who stick with it, like they've got to deal with like GDKP and like there's a whole bunch of like there's basically like two ways to play Classic. You either are a tourist who like pops in for your yearly play of FF7, or you're just this like utterly degenerate GDKP like instrumental to the max. You know, okay, we're gonna have like freshly primed characters sitting outside where the portal is eventually going to be patched in for this raid, so that we can kill it, like we can clear it within 12 minutes of the servers becoming accessible. And it's like it's a very wide gulf. It's very interesting, but like yeah, you got to be a very specific sort of personality to really like have Classic be your pillar game.
It's funny, like the way you say that, it makes it sound difficult, and to me, it would be impossible to do that. Like the amount of research and investment in the game to play it like that would be, you know, it would be my life. But I get the feeling that a lot of people that take up that position in the Classic community, it just comes at this stage because they spent so long on private servers and stuff. It's essentially second nature. I remember we were at a gaming bar with our guild once, and like Mario Kart 64 was on one of the systems on the wall, and our friend, he picked it up and he was like, yo, I'm gonna do the shortcut. I haven't played this game in like 20 years, but I'm gonna do the shortcut on Rainbow Road. And he just drifted off the edge and dropped like 100 in-game feet onto another part of the track, which, you know, is impossible. It takes like immense skill, and it was just in his muscle memory. He just did it. He could pick it up after 20 years. He could just do it. And that's what I get the feeling sort of like, you know, hardcore Classic players are. It's sort of,
and you have to be that kind of character, like you have to be that kind of player to willingly step into Naxxramas in a hardcore environment. Like it's like, okay, so a bit of lag around the slimes after patchwork, and welcome to Durotar. You know, so yeah, it is interesting, and I'm very glad Classic Hardcore exists, because I will probably never play it, but I enjoy seeing the highlights.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm thrilled that they exist. I'm really glad that they have their audiences, but also I just know I'm it's not for me, and it's never going to be for me. Like I'm never going to be the like ultimate min-maxer, because that's just not my gameplay style. And I don't know if I'm ever going to be a tourist in Classic either, because I'm aware that there is this like other style of gameplay going on.
Well, that's the thing. It kind of, it's almost impossible to be a tourist in Classic at this time. Like, you know, when I picked up Classic the first time, I got really into it for the first couple of weeks. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'd never played vanilla. I'm not like you. I'm not a day one subscriber and player, Dan. But
I was day 2.
Oh, no way. Oh, fraud.
I mean,
Absolute
depending
fake.
on the time zone.
I can't believe we invited him on this
Depending on,
show. This is just, we're going to get so much shit.
Well, okay, so like the funny story is I wasn't sure if I was going to do it because I was really wary about like, do I want to sign up for a subscription thing?
That was a big deal in those days, yeah.
It was still a big deal. And then I got injured at work. I picked up a broken pot and sliced my hand open. And so suddenly I had a workers' comp claim and a week of paid time off.
Awesome.
And World of Warcraft had come out the day before, and so it's like, so I like leave the clinic after getting my hand stitched up, and I'm like, Best Buy's right there.
Yeah, I got some time off. I got some money in my pocket.
I got some time off.
But like I when I started playing, I was like, yeah, man, I'm gonna get like the priest staff. I'm gonna do all the things that, you know, I'd never have been able to do if I played it at the time, because now I know about it and now I know what I've got to do, and it's
And
all
now
written
you
there.
can read
The
a
guides are all there.
guide,
I've
right,
got
yeah.
my 10,000 hours in WoW. I've got my 5 solid like in-game years in
Yeah.
WoW. I'm a master at this game. I can do it. But it became very obvious very quickly that actually the disparity, like the discrepancy between people that did go full in on that game and people that played it more casually was, if anything, I think like even higher. The gulf is bigger between those two kinds of players than it is in retail.
Oh, exactly.
And you were
Yeah.
just so behind so quickly that it just felt, you know, there hasn't been a day in Classic where I haven't felt like I was catching up, you know, and it's wild. It kind of just, for me, it shuts me out completely. But I love that the game exists. Are you still playing it?
Classic?
Yeah.
I dip in every now and then, but I haven't had a really big continuous play streak since launch. In part because like the solo experience isn't bad, but I need to be in a very specific mood for it. And the rest of my friends are at this point like so dispersed through the Classic ecosystem as a whole that like there's just kind of like I don't really have a group to latch onto. That might change if the Karazhan Karazhan Crypts rumor ends up being true. If that does end up being like new bespoke content specifically for Season of Discovery, then I will probably go out of my way like specifically to do that, because then
It seems like such
Season
an
of
obvious
Discovery
one, yeah.
like yeah, I mean Season of Discovery is really like it's really fun, but I don't kind of have like a group to really play it with, so it hasn't been able to hook me for long periods of time. But if there's like not just a fresh way of playing the game, but like wholly new content, like it's like, hey, here's something from 20 years ago, like resurrected and actually sort of like finally finished after 2 decades. Like I think that's special enough that I will go out of my way specifically to do that.
That would be finally hitting like the Classic Plus sort of promise as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think if anything, like it would be a really clever sort of way to like have a Classic Plus without having a Classic Plus, and that it's like, well, you know, we're not technically adding new content specifically
it's
for
all in
Classic.
the files.
It was always there. We just moved some mobs into it. Yeah,
makes perfect sense. Although there is stuff in Season of Discovery that people have been sending me, because I haven't been playing. I keep meaning to pick it up, and I just love the idea of it so much. But every time I actually log in, I just do like this big sigh and go back and do some Mythic Plus instead. And I wish, and that's a fault of mine, not of the game, because it's incredible. Everyone's having a really good time with it. And even worse, I think it's because there's the 100% XP boost gain for under level 25, which is coming into effect next week. So it's that kind of thing where we're getting our kitchen done in a couple of weeks. The builders have been around. They're like, yo, yeah, we'll do this, we'll do that. And we're like, nice one. Boom. Awesome. Do a Patreon video. There's that thing now, because we know we're getting the kitchen done. We're not really cleaning the kitchen. And so, if the floor gets a bit messy, it's like, well, I mean, that floor's coming up in a couple of weeks, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? The big hole in the ceiling, it's like, well, I mean, we could fix it, but, they're doing a new ceiling in a couple of weeks. So it's fine. It's like, there's a rotting kind of cake or kind of roast chicken on the side. It's like, yeah, I mean, technically very unhygienic.
Sure, I could clean that up, but a bunch of workmen are coming in.
Builders are going to do it.
There's going to be a giant
They've got a skip
trash bin outside of the house. Like, why put it in the little one when I could wait for the big one to come and then put it all in there at the same time? Yeah.
So, and that's the kind of feeling I've got with Season of Discovery at the moment. I'm like, well, it seems pointless doing anything now.
I mean, the thing is that I can't say that what I'm doing in retail is necessarily like a better use of time. So you want to hear what my stupid project has been?
I demand it.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Warbands are coming up. Your customizable login screen. I misremembered something from BlizzCon. I had remembered it as 4 alts. So main plus 4, right? 5 characters, nice and symmetrical. Your main in the middle. No, it's 4. But 5, I incepted in my own head 5 characters on this login screen, and I've been maining Evoker. You know what would go great? What would look fantastic on that login screen? 5 themed Evokers. One for
different
each
flights.
One for each flight. Each one like with a thematic, like, a flight appropriate name.
Beautiful
color. Okay, great. This will look amazing. Okay, but you can only have 1 evoker per realm, and in order to have an evoker on a realm, you need to have a level 50 on that realm. So I start like power leveling, just like hunters, rogues, demon hunters, up to 50 in order to make an evoker. To level that to 70, to then go jump onto another realm. And like, I'm on Nathrazim, so it's part of one of the like big sort of mega realms. There's like 8 or 9 name servers that are attached to the actual servers. So these are all like, so they're all on the same server cluster. And then I'm level 61 on the green dragon, which is the last one that I have to do.
Oh, mate.
When I see on Reddit someone like, my warband is ready to go, and they post they post this screenshot of like 4 characters, and I'm like,
where's the
well, there's you're missing one, bro. And then I'm like,
oh no.
Hey Dan, you should double check this.
All right, well, the campaign starts now. The crusade starts now. It's like, we've got a bit of sway in the WoW community. If we just dedicate every single weekly reset episode from now on into being like, the community has spoken, Blizz. They want 5 tunes on the Warband screen. This is the worst thing. Like, we can't possibly play with 4. What are you even playing at, Blizz? Why do you hate your player base? Why don't you respect our time? Give us the 4. 5.
It's a widescreen. It's a widescreen aspect ratio. 4 is gonna.
Well, and imagine not having the amount of characters that make up a party, a dungeon party. It doesn't make any sense at all.
And I think that's actually why 5 like felt so just natural. It's like, oh, it's like it's your dungeon party numbers. So
I'm convinced. Having 4 on the Warband screen is not just an insult. It's a slap in the face. It's a spit down my throat. Why do Blizz hate their players?
But
why do they hate their players? Damn, there's the question.
We joke, but we have the clout to get this changed if we were that just craven.
Are we that craven?
I think if Mike Ybarra was still there, we could get it done. I reckon that we could like Mike Ibarra. I get the feeling if you were nice to him and if you said he was cool, you could kind of make him do anything you wanted to
If you
do.
send him a nice tweet.
Yeah, you'd be like, wow, Dan, I've been really enjoying your Hogwarts Legacy playthrough on Twitch. How about those 5 Warband characters? What do you think about that? Would that be cool?
Yeah. No, but what I love about this is it just goes to show, like, you know, if you ask someone, it's like, are you playing WoW right now? Yes. Are you playing retail? Yeah. You know, how you are playing retail might be very different from how someone else is playing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, there is such a kind of, at the moment, especially when we've got a bit of a content drought going on, we're still waiting for news on 10.26. You know, I luckily playing WoW and writing about WoW and talking about WoW is our job as well. So we always have a reason and an excuse to play. I guess when you're kind of in the midst of, you know, video work and creating a new piece for your channel, does WoW kind of drift off? Is it something you can drift in and out of, or because you are an unbroken sub still from your first day, from the first month that the game was out? Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's still the case. Which I mean comes down to a little bit of like. There is a healthy chunk there at the end of WoD and through most of Legion where that active sub was not actually active. So I did kind of get got by subscription mentality. But yeah, no, I leave it active. I usually come in and out like during content droughts or when I get really fixated on getting a video finished. My playtime will go down a lot, or you know I'll bounce off onto like Oxygen Not Included or City Skylines or something else like a construction game for a while. Like I'll have a big Minecraft or Valheim burst. But you know. I mean, at the end of the day, like, just because you've got a subscription doesn't mean WoW needs to be like the one game you play, right? Like, it would in fact be insane and unhealthy to have that like opinion in your brain.
I think some people might have that opinion. I hate to break it to you, Dan.
You know, so yeah, like I'll bounce in and out, and like right now, like I think just this week, our last raider got their Firaloth. I have all of my evokers at least LFR geared or better. I was using our Firaloth grind to like sneak evokers in for ahead of the curve. So 4 of the 5 have ahead of the curve just by like forcing the raid to carry me.
That's incredible.
It's like, are you gonna? Do you have like a uniform in mind for your 5? Because it will be 5. We'll make sure
I
it
have
happens
to know
for your 5 evokers.
Names, everything. I need all the details.
Okay, so the names are so the names are all thematic. So Christagosa was the first one that I made, which was of course a variant on my druid's name. And then Christraza, Christharion, Chrisadormu, and Christra. For the
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
it's important
beautiful.
that you stick to dragon naming conventions.
Oh,
I don't tend to, but you do. You're a big stickler on that.
Yeah, it's the law when you have an evoker.
I just name them all after dragons from Earthsea, but you actually like stick to the names.
Yeah, no.
Ooh, Earthsea's a good place to pull. Yeah. So we've got 484, 465, 466, 457, 451.
Put my orcs to shame there.
Wow.
I have gotten very good at getting new characters LFR ready.
I feel like at the very least they should share a tabard. That's what I kind of think with my warbands. I'm thinking, they're going to have a tabard. So it's almost like they're in a guild together. I'll find a tabard, a lesser used tabard that kind of resonates with me or something. And they'll all be wearing that. That'll be like their uniform. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Right now I've got them all very like, they're all kind of bespoke.
It doesn't matter. Right? You can't see him on. Can't see him on a evoker anyway. You can't see any transmog on them at all. You can have whatever.
Oh no, like their transmogs actually are all just like chaos. Everyone. So my main has a like customized transmog that I've worked on. I think I'm in like Ulduar gear or Uldir gear at the moment. Because I got the Titan hammer from that bronze dragon instance. So I built a transmog around that hammer. And then the others, no transmog, they're literally just dressed like clowns. in a chaos of whatever. But then they're like, their dragon forms are very like, I love customizing the dragon forms. I think a lot of people overstate the whole transmog issue on Drakthir. Like, people who don't play Drakthir overstate it.
That sounds very unlike the WoW community. Are you sure?
No, I agree. I agree, actually, because as I was, playing through Dragonflight, and I swapped. I left my hunter behind for a little while, and I became an evoker, and I found it like essential as when I started, like the blue, flight quest line. I had to change and become a blue dragon, right? And as I did stuff for Alexstrasza, I got a cool red, hat. I was like, okay, now I'm a red dragon.
So your dragon's more like a chameleon.
Yeah. And I had this like really fixed identity, before the game dropped, and I spent ages in the character creation, and that all fell out the window when I started playing, and I was like, oh wait, hold on, I have to be like the flight that I am.
Interacting with,
yeah,
like people who kind of adopt the accent of whoever they're talking to.
Yeah, but then of course, the pinnacle of that is when you go through all of the colors, and you're right, Dan. Like all of the the actual armor, Drakthir armor customizations are amazing. You can make them look super cool without wearing any real armor.
Yeah, she is.
And then hello.
Yeah, this is Felix. He's the younger one.
Hello, Felix. Oh.
A classic cat name.
Yeah,
Dan, a stickler for dragon naming conventions and cat naming conventions, and I appreciate that.
But of course, once you've exhausted every color of Drakthir, you have to go for like the white bald, like, do you know what I mean? Like naked, like worm.
Oh no,
right?
we need 6. We need 6.
So that's the state of my Evoker right now.
Blizzard, give us 6 Warband characters on the front screen, or you hate your players. Why do you hate your players, Blizz? Why? Oh man.
Do we have time to like pivot to like one other subject? What's our time looking like?
Oh, whatever you like. We got time.
Yeah, please pivot.
Yeah.
And if it comes down to it, I can take
I
off
mean,
and
this
Sally
is a
can
laser focused
pull down the thing.
podcast.
Yes.
So this is very unusual for us to do a pivot, but we can appease our guests.
We'll allow it.
That, yeah.
Just this one time.
So a thing that's really been on my mind a lot lately is the idea of a world revamp, and specifically this sort of tension that needs to be resolved between the community and itself, and the community's relationship with the game. And I think there's been a really interesting shift in the way that players feel about the game that I don't think they necessarily appreciate, that has shifted within them. So sentiment right now on Reddit, on the forums, on the influencer sphere is that a old world revamp, or making better use of Eastern Kingdom's Kalimdor, making use of places we've already been, in order to have like important events happen in places that were previously important, and not just as a like little instanced pocket that you go into during a questing scenario, that there's sort of a thirst for that. That the opinion is that it's like, why hasn't Blizzard already been doing this all along? Is kind of the way that it sort of gets talked about, especially on Reddit. Reddit really likes to sort of talk about it as if it's this no-brainer that's just been sitting on the table for 20 years, and like, why haven't they bothered to do that? And that's a new sentiment that I think it's really interesting that we're seeing that come up, but I think it's because we've hit sort of thresholds. Because if you go back to like, if Mists of Pandaria had come out and like, we had that long content drought at the end of Mists of Pandaria, and then they were like, all right, coming up, Warlords of Draenor, no new continents, just old stuff, 0 new zones. Just like, it's like, we're just going to send you back to places you've already been. That would be the line. It's like, well, they're just sending us places we've already been.
Sure.
You had this cultural expectation of like, what's an expansion? It's a new continent, 4 to 6 new zones, X new dungeons, whatever. But it's new. That it can't just be something new in a place we've already been. It must be built from the ground up, because otherwise you're disrespecting us with what you're giving to us. And I think that's finally Cataclysm did some damage
To the
but
psyche
I
of the
think
average WoW player, yeah.
but I think it's I think that's finally shifting, and I think I can pinpoint like how and why Dragonflight primed people for that.
How?
Oh, yes. Tell us.
So Dragonflight is in many ways a redo of Dragon Blight, right? You know,
Sure.
you had the you had the, I don't even remember what it's called at the moment. The Temple of the Aspects in the middle of Dragonblight, the big old tower. You know, where up at the top you've got like Alexstrasza and a couple others just kind of like standing around in human form. And even back at the time, it was sort of commented that it's like why is this tower not like dragon sized? Like they're dragons, but they interact with the architecture in like human scale. And so Valdrakken is kind of the like 2.0, like, oh, here is the dragon scale size of, like, here is the dragon scaled version of that. And it's just kind of this like, it's like, oh, but here's the one that was actually important. That one up in Northrend, like, yeah, it's important, but it's the imitator. This is the original. It was just off screen the whole time. And Dragonflight has had a lot of really good content that sort of has that narrative role of like, oh, this was the like original version of the thing. It was hiding over here just off screen the whole time. And you do that enough times and people start realizing this, like, wait a second, like WoW has actually really been doing that a lot for like 18 years, where it's like, oh, here's the real like basically once, you know, really like in a lot of ways after Wrath, especially after Legion, you know, and basically after BFA, like all the legacy locations, or virtually all of the legacy locations from the previous games were now in game.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we've sort of exhausted this pool of lore locations that have been just off screen, and now we need to just invent new lore locations, and we need to come up with reasons for both why they're important and why we haven't already been there.
And then, but I guess the problem is that they then followed the same formula of, say, a Kultiris or a Nazjatar or an Argus, where they just treated it as if it was a legacy location. You know, the idea that it's sort of, we've created a new legacy location and it's always been there, and we never really talked about it before like we did Nazjatar and like we did Argus. But believe me, the characters know, they all know,
Right.
It's all in there, it's all internalized sort of thing. So yeah, and I think that is something that has kind of frustrated players. I feel like to an extreme kind of warped degree, that's exactly what happened in Shadowlands as well. The idea of all the Lich King stuff, all the architecture, all the armor, all the spikes.
The initial and with Shadowlands, like the initial stuff where like you go in and it's just like, it's like, oh, okay, all of the Northrend architecture is sort of being retconned as being like influenced by that. It's like, and initially it was like, oh, that's kind of like a cool little thematic resonance, right? You know, it's like you're just kind of adding a little bit of new backstory flavor into it, and then it wound up becoming like so oppressively central as Zoval got built into being like actually the puppet master behind everything important that's happened. And it's just like, it got exhausting. It got exhausting and it got stupid. And yeah, so I think it's the fact that Dragonflight has been able to deliver very good content that has invited people to engage with it, but then that engagement has exposed this sort of like quirk of its existence that has then called attention to a long-running narrative trick that the game has used, and that has shifted player sentiment into this like, no, we really actually truly need to go see what's happening in these other places in the world that used to be important and have now been frozen in amber for you know n years.
And there is the promise of kind of doing that in the World Soul Saga, I guess, with Northrend being a zone that we'll be going back to in The Last Titan, and Kel'Thalas in Midnight. Is that enough, do you think? Is that what the player base want? Is kind of just happening in a current expansion, or something more evergreen, do you think?
I think the safer way of doing it, like I don't know that there is necessarily a right answer, because obviously a total overhaul, you run into the cataclysm problem, which is, a two-pronged problem. One is the sheer volume of work to be done on that world overhaul wound up killing an entire tier. And two, what if the decisions you make are kind of cringe, but you've committed to doing the entire world in it? Like I have done a lot of cata content in leveling those four other characters, and like some of it holds up and a lot of it is just like, wow, this is kind of like very oppressively of its time, in a way that I don't even think like. Okay, so in the WoW Classic and What We Left Behind video, I talked about, sort of one of the problems of Cataclysm being the decisions that were made and the way that a lot of the zones were sequels to their previous versions. And the example that I used visually in the video was Dustwallow Marsh, because that was like the sort of the most current on the top of my mind. Really, like I should have used Hillsbrad Foothills, because like, by God, as I was leveling through there, I was like, this is incoherent if you don't know, like if you're a person who does read quest text, this zone makes no sense if you didn't play Classic. It's all just references and in jokes and, oh, here's this character that you met before, but now they're like doing this other thing. Oh, look, like all of these people that you like went and killed in this original quest, well, now their undead versions are like mini bosses in this new quest line. And I'm just like, this is incoherent. Like if you are not deep inside WoW baseball and we're not like very familiar with the old structure of the zone, the fact that you will pick up on the fact that these quests are constantly like giving you a wink and a nudge, like, hey, remember this, like it's member berries the zone. And like it's like, okay, so you can do a zone overhaul and wreck it. And I think that's the really delicate thing. And then also the question of like, how do you just replace the old stuff? How do you layer it on with phasing and whatnot without making it just like weird and cumbersome? Or do you even care about that at all? Do you like layer on a new version and be like, here's a dragon that'll take you back to the other version if you want to see it, and that's just kind of available as like an accessibility option effectively, because like with sort of the full awareness that 10 people a year are going to actually go click on that dragon and play through 20-year-old quests.
Yeah. It's funny because I started playing in Cataclysm. And so like my understanding of WoW is that it was essentially incoherent. It was like, right, okay, so I've got these kind of like pop culture references and some jokes. Clearly some stuff happened in the past. I like the way my elf looks. This is fun. I can turn into a cat. And so that was my understanding of it until it kind of progressed. And then you get, you get stories and you get like actual like quest writing and then kind of later expansions and stuff that stands on its own. So it's funny going into it that way, but it does make me think about some of the things that they've started doing in retail now with some of the kind of like dipping back into the old world without actually changing it. So you've got dynamic flight, which, you know, now you can zip around those zones and experience them in a new way. And another was with some of the new holidays. I did the Love is in the Air quest.
Oh, Love is in the Air was great. What
right?
What a fabulous, you know, every now and then, like, okay, so like I do have some like marketing and like product experience, and film school will like if you take a technical school, they will in fact teach you about like okay, a property, like an exploitable property, like if you have an IP, it is a thing that you can exploit, like you have the rights to like make money off of it and think about it like a product and whatnot. And so like I still have that in the back of my brain, and I look at Love is in the Air and I'm just like, what a fabulous value. Like, you know, like in terms of like how many people it would have taken to make that, how many bespoke how many artist assets needed to be made, how many quest designers needed to be employed for how long in order to populate all of that stuff. And it's like, and in terms of how much people liked it, how much it got talked about, how many players engaged with it, what a just amazing value, right? Like it's like so that business aspect like creeps in every now and then, but like no, like Love is in the Air was great. It was, you know, you had a reason to go to these old zones. Your time spent there was like just long enough to kind of like remember like, oh, the great ambiance over here in Grizzly Hills, without kind of. And I think very importantly, they had a movement system sort of arranged to make the point A to point B not feel egregious, which can't necessarily be said for. It's like, all right, now head on out to Silver Pine. No, I'm super rambling, but yes, Love is in the Air was great and really made good use of existing zones.
Is that all it takes, do you think? And for it to be, is it dangerous to have it too relevant in terms of a world revamp? Because I mean, that you could argue that's the problem with Cataclysm, right? It's like we put in all this work, but again, instantly from day 2 of Cataclysm, it's old content again, and the second Mists releases, half of the storylines in those catazones are out of date, and they are themselves like so specific to a certain storyline, and a very intense storyline. Like half the zones have a Deathwing like flying around and being a main character and stuff like that.
Scene,
so and you know, that's been there now longer than the original vanilla zones ever were, by miles, by far. And it's one of the things that makes the old world feel so in need of a revamp, I think, is because not only has that content been there for a long time, but it's such specific content, and it's so specific to a certain expansion. Is there the danger with something like Midnight or The Last Titan, where you are revamping it specifically for the purposes of an expansion? Is there a danger that you're going to have the same problem? Is it better to?
I think there's a danger, but also an opportunity. Because if you're kind of going in and you're doing a little bit of a, you know, you're just doing a little bit of a repave. You're like, it's like, okay, you get into this questing phase, and then, you know, we're not doing like big terrain overhauls. We're just like, you get into the area and the NPCs repopulate.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of new triggers around for like dialogue and whatnot. It is an opportunity. Like there's a risk of making it too hyper specific, but there's also an opportunity to just kind of like genericize it a little bit. You know, that it's like, okay, like what if you go into the area and there's a new story happening, but that story doesn't could just be a new local story that's happening in that region, and it has thematic or like it has ties into the bigger expansion, like it has ties into Midnight, but it's not like, you know, oh, what is Xalatath doing right over here? Here's a Ridicron, like XYZ thing. It can be a local story about like furbolgs or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and and I think like that's really kind of like a lot of what's missing from the Kata revamp is like it's all so hyper focused on the day Deathwing arrived, and there's not enough just like what are people doing over there.
Yeah. I think it's the Deathwind thing, and I think it's also the main theme of all of those stories is everything is broken. Everything just broke just now. It literally just broke. We are dealing with how it is. We're not used to it being broken yet. Like, we are dealing with the fact that it's just broken, and this is a new thing for us. And of course, like 20 years later, 15 years later, you're within your rights to be kind of asking, why are you not used to how broken it is yet? Why haven't you fixed that wall? It's just a wall. If it's causing so much problem, just fix the wall. And so I think it's that thing. It's not just the fact that it was expansion specific. It was the situation, that expansion was so immediate, and it doesn't really kind of survive a long kind of expanse of time. And more than any other expansion, the story in Cataclysm kind of ages, really.
Because you replay Mop, you replay Dragonflight, heck, even like WoD's leveling experience where you get this Dragonflight's a great example. You've got your main storyline with the flights. You've got your shield quests, which are very much like Razagath storyline building up to the raid. But then if you wander 20 feet off to the side of that line, here's just a quest about like here's a story about a bunch of funny walrus kids who have found a gnoll kid that they want to be friends with, but the gnoll kid wants to eat them because he thinks they're food, and it's like, here's a little walrus kid who lost his mother, so he wants to be a hero. So you go convince a yeti to humor his desire to be a monster slayer, and like. You can do that a billion times. Like you can come back to that 20 years from now, and it's not going to be like, yeah, okay, we get it. Like, yeah, Razagath, like, like you've got those breaks. You have that breathing room around it that I think the Cataclysm stuff was lacking. So that would be the main sort of like in populating the new stuff and updating it, the creative impetus needs to be something like can't get bogged down in this like intense need to be relevant. It's like you gotta have irrelevant side stories that are just self-contained and good and like doing something different so that there's a break, because otherwise because the thing is that MMOs are built by so many different people, so many different quest writers, so many different quest, scripters and whatnot, who are all working on their own little pocket of stuff. And if they're all working at the exact same level of intensity, you unintentionally end up with this like overload of relevance.
Yeah, I get that. There is an argument though, and a feeling in the community that maybe Dragonflight throughout the lifetime of it as an expansion has lacked a bit of relevance and could have done with a little bit more. And whereas I agree with you, I think Dragonflight as content will age really, really well. And I think it's been designed that way. Like I think Dragonflight will probably be the new player leveling experience all the way through the World Soul Saga. I don't think they'll move on to the War Within when Midnight comes out. I think it's
no, I think they'll sit on Dragonflight for a while. Yeah.
I think so. And I think it's designed to be like that for many of the reasons you just gave. But then you can go on YouTube right now and find any amount of people complaining that there's a lack of danger, there's a lack of stakes, the story isn't immediate enough, isn't kind of dangerous enough. Is that a symptom of the good things that we've listed there, do you think?
I in some ways, I don't think it necessarily is true. Like if you do the main quest line, like if you stay on kind of the shield quest rails, then Dragonflight has it's got a lot of inertia. it does have a, you know, Razagath is just present enough through that whole story that like you don't forget that like she's around and she's up to something, and you've got like a major sort of interaction in every zone. And also every zone has on their shield path has at least one side story that is about the consequences of Razagath, but not about Razagath. So like the best example of that is Brackenhide, where, you know, you have this like this obsession with rot power that is like at risk of just kind of like consuming the zone, and is having all of this spillover effect. And that's not like Razagath's doing. It's just kind of a consequence of the Primalists going to the Gnolls and being like, yo, hey guys, you want some rot power? And then the Primalists do that, like in the storyline, like they basically give these totems to the Gnolls and then peace out, and like they're not present otherwise. Yeah. It's a consequence of a thing that they've done. And I think there's a fantastic inertia to the main storyline. I think there are definitely hitches. You know, there's that tower in Eastern Azure Span that's
the ice
it's
tower?
the climax. Yeah, it's the climax of Azure Span, and then we never go back.
No,
we still
never
don't know what's in it.
We
We never get inside. Like, yeah, still
so
don't know what
important.
was in there.
And I don't think they even reveal that in like the book or anything like that. In the Scaleborn novel, I kind of expected there to be huge swathes of that novel set in that tower and how important it was, and for all to be revealed. But no, just one of those things.
Yeah. So like, I don't want to. I'm not saying that there aren't like dropped threads or like kind of hitches in the storyline. I think Viraloth's her heel turn, or I guess face turn, was narratively forecast very well, but then it's like they forecast it and then it just happens like immediately after, and it's like you could have given that like one more chapter worth of like hang time, like, you know, so like there's definitely hitches and like inconsistencies and whatnot. I don't think it necessarily like I think the like lack of relevance, or what people are describing as a lack of relevance, is that thing that I was talking about earlier, where they're seeing sort of the seams of oh, here's this place that's important, but we need to kind of come up with a reason for why it wasn't important enough for us to have just come back here. Or like, why didn't we come back here earlier when XYZ other like world threatening thing was happening? And I think it's the themes on that are really like standing out. And so that plus the jank that undeniably does exist in there is creating some dissonance that people are describing as that like are describing as that lack of relevance.
Can I ask you then, in because just my own like personal interest, where would you rank Dragonflight's narrative in comparison to other expansions in that case?
Second behind Mop.
Really? That high up?
Actually, you know what? No, I'm gonna say Mop. BFAs, or well, okay, like actually, what are sort of our constraints on this? Yeah, what are our bounds? Because I'm thinking leveling experience.
Okay, I know. I need as like a beginning, middle, and end of like an expansion story. I think I want to take the whole story as a into consideration.
Yeah. God, which ones? Okay, so like that introduces the question of like, yeah, which expansions didn't turn into like kind of a cluster over the course of their development?
Because BFA just falls into bits.
BFA falls into just kind of shatters. God, I love that expansion, but like it's a mess by the end. Mop manages to kind of hold itself through the entire thing. Wrath.
It's
Where
tight.
would I put Dragonflight? God, I don't know. I would still definitely put it in like the top 5. I think I would need to really I think I would really need to like sit down and hash out like, okay, which expansions just sort of like fell off their own rails in patch 2, patch 3.
Yeah.
Which ones managed to sort of like, which ones maybe like took a long detour in the middle, but then like came back, you know, but stuck the landing. Because the thing is that like all of them have some weirdness. All of them have some jank. I think Legion and Mop are probably the two most cohesive in terms of like none of their mid patches were like kind of disastrous detours that derailed what sort of followed. Cataclysm, ironically, does manage to be fairly consistent from beginning to end, largely because the path from beginning to end is kind of tragically short. Ditto WAD, incidentally, same reasons.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's
I don't know.
it's-
That's
Yeah, it's hard to factor in, even thinking about, you know, because we're looking back on them now as these kind of contained stories, but obviously we experience them as like, you know, little bits of content, you know, huge drop of content, and then drips and drabs and patches with big weights and short weights, and so.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to kind of look back on it, but I think there's something to be said about how like linear Dragonflight's story is. Like when I think back on it, it's obviously, you know, fresh in my mind, but it's like, okay, we've got our Dragonflights. They're all color coded. This is, you know, like really just kind of thinking of it as like mind map. There's like,
I'm with it.
they're color coded. They have a physical space around kind of the map, and they're all associated, you know, they have their like associated characters. And then we've got this little group of baddies, and they are also color coded, and and there's like a kind of quite a straightforward story. So maybe this is just because I've played it most recently, but when I look back on it, I'm like, okay, this is going to be easy for me to kind of in the future talk about and be like, okay, this is what happened in Dragonflight. It had this story. It started here, ended here. We did these little things along the way.
We've got two groups of baddies, except one of those groups of baddies is not necessarily is your like sympathetic baddies,
Right?
Because they're actually like rebels. You know, you've got the whole Sarkarath plot line with the rebels, which is like it's not.
I'm even
it's
okay
not
with the primalists
bad.
these
There's
days.
some
Like I like those little quests in the Emerald Dream where you go around like recruiting primalists, and you know, some of them are like, oh no, death to you, grr. But then some of them are literally like, yeah, I don't really know. I kind of wasted my time for the last couple of years. I don't know what I'm doing.
Right?
This is rubbish. Why am I here?
I'm
This
looking
sucks.
around and I feel like we've lost the plot. I don't remember what we were doing. Like why? How did I end up out here? I signed up for Dragon Emancipation, and now I'm trying to burn down.
I feel like we might be the
Earth
baddies.
itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that. That's not something you usually get with a lot of WoW kind of wrap up sort of zones and stuff, which I guess is what Emerald Dream is.
I think actually on that note, the single player climax for Emerald Dream where oh god, it's so good. It's so good. Like you're fighting outside the temple, or like you do all of the fighting at the tier, and then it's like the assault on the temple starts, and you do the first couple of quests where you're like, it's like, oh, run over here and go kill these two big elementals, and then go spy on this stuff over here, and then you fly around with Alexstrasza and knock down the 3 pylons, and it's like it's all very normal, but then it's like it plays that cutscene where Farak like knocks Alexstrasza. Yeah, the Avengers Assemble moment where like Farak knocks her out, and it's like everybody comes out, and I'm like, oh, that's really good. But then like this brilliant quest immediately after that, where you have this whole diorama of like everybody's out fighting, and you go around And it's like, and you've got two options for how to complete the quest. One, you can go kill stuff, or two, you can just walk around and click on this little horn extra action button that you've got and get some dialogue from it. And I've done that 6 times now, and every time I choke up because you're going around and it's like it's so good with like all these little dialogue things that you get. And like I thought it like the magic might. So the first time I'm just like blown away. I'm choked up. I'm like I got to talk about this like somewhere. But then I'm like, it's like, you know what? The magic will probably wear off. Like you just kind of got caught off guard by it. But no, I've done it a bunch of times. It's legitimately really good. And like the dialogue that you're getting from these NPCs as you're going next to them, and the fact that like some of them are really sort of triumphant, but a bunch of them are kind of fatalist.
Yeah.
Like there's a bunch of little moments around the edges, particularly with Voss, Lillian, you know, where like there's a bunch of moments around the edges where they're just like, yeah, we're probably gonna die here, but like it was worth it. And I think yeah, like just having this scene where it's like, you know, like there's a great tension within the scene where like some people are like, yeah, we're coming in and we're winning Avengers Assemble, and they're like, but it's not sort of this like uniform, like, we've won already. It's a really well told sort of story that you can experience at your leisure, and you don't need to kill a thing in order to complete it. And in fact, like you've got twice as many little dialogue moments that you can experience by using the horn as you need to actually fill the bar.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And the first time I did it, I was just like, I was done the quest like 10 minutes before I actually turned it in, because I was just like, is there more? Is there one that I missed? Like I'm going around like every NPC with a name, I'm just going and standing next to them, and like
I was so
like,
scared that I was going to accidentally complete the quest before I'd had a chance to kind of hear everything. It makes me so happy to hear you say that as well, because I don't know how kind of like in with sort of internet WoW discourse you are, but people were really down on that cutscene on I mean the fact that we call it the Avengers Assemble, right? And people hated that. People used it as example of like why WoW is trash now and whatever. Fair enough, but like the thing that annoyed me, if anything, was the fact that people never talked about that scene afterwards as well. And you know they are part of the same chapter of the story, and yeah, it's such a good kind of climax to that lead into the raid, I guess.
Yeah, and then likewise, I had a similar experience with, you know, once you're in Belemeth and you're having the big party, and then you're going around and talking to everyone at the party, like that, you know, just another like just loved these kind of these quests where I just wanted to go around and actually talk to everybody. Yeah, like new characters, but also legacy characters.
I think Dragonflight is really good at wrapping stuff up and sort of like putting a more satisfying than usual bow on kind of storylines and what have you. Like even just kind of the Draconids in you know, there's like that rebel faction of Dragonkin who kind of want to blow up Alexstrasza and stuff, and usually you'd kind of stomp on them and that would be the end of it, but she invites them for tea and listens to their problems, and then she's like, "Oh yeah, I guess it is bad that we treat you like slaves."
I guess. Yeah. Oh wow, slavery bad actually.
Well, you act like that's easy, but they don't manage it in Harry Potter. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
No, it was a very like that was a difficult. I think they did an okay job at like threading through it without it getting like too cringe, but like it is sort of like weird when you do have to sort of unravel that like. Oh, you know, 25 years ago, like however many years ago, like literally decades ago, some dude who was not thinking ahead that it's like, oh yeah, this is going to be a thing that someone will need to grapple with in the future. It's just like, they've got a bunch of magical helpers who are also like, they're smaller dragons. And it's like, well, what do they do? I don't know. They were magically created as servants, whatever.
But they like it though, Dan. You don't understand. They like it so much. Just like the owl people in Shadowlands, they'd be upset if you made them stop.
And it's like okay, like it's difficult to sort of like unravel that. I think the quest where you're walking around with Alexstrasza and she's like, slavery bad? Wow. Like,
What,
that's
you
a
have
little
hopes and
weird, but
dreams?
you hopes and oh, you want things? You experience pain?
You want, but you want to do fighting for the dragons.
wanna
So, no,
do
you want to
things.
paint. Wow. That's-
Yeah, that one was a little weird. I think, like,
But I'm glad they went there, though. It was
I'm
weird.
glad
But
they-
it kind of, you
yeah.
can't not make it weird in a way. And I'm glad that
Yeah.
if you have to have that moment of orcs and cringe and just going, wow, Alex Strauss is literally the most stupid person ever born. If that does then solve the thing, then I think it's probably worthwhile. I don't know.
It's probably worthwhile. And I think the follow-up quest after that, where, like, Alex Strauss goes back up to the top of the tower, but then you get to do, like, but then there's a bunch more, like, dialogue, and you go around and you talk with some more draconids. And I think the thing sort of after that really smoothed it over. And also for players who played Evoker through the expansion, they got a whole bunch of, like, amazing little side stories with the with like the Shattered Flame follow-up, and people sort of like de-radicalizing, but then also like that tying in with kind of the core Evoker whole story of, like, oh, well, we were built as super soldiers and then put into stasis for 1 billion years, and, like, where do we, like, fit into the world if, like, you know, it's like, okay, I'm a decommissioned Terminator, what do I do now? And there's this great little scene, you know, it's actually like, it was like a 4-week quest, 5-week quest or something like that, of basically setting up for this, like, mix and mingle.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But I love a WoW mix and mingle, though. That's
And
yeah,
it was great.
Same.
Yeah, I like all that. I think it's been great. And like, okay, so it has actually kind of. There were times during the 10.2 stuff and where I felt like I was going a little bit mad, and I felt like I was the only person that had any good things to say about it at all. So like, I find it very vindicating to hear you say some nice things about it too, and I'm gonna stick with it. That's good. I'd love to pick your brains about just some of the more immediate WoW discourse
Sure.
while you're here. I think for me it's just like such a joy to hear you talk about WoW, because you're someone who I don't talk to about WoW. I listen to you talk about other things, and hearing you kind of be part of this world, which I know you live in, but which you don't show so much, is like super interesting. So like, one of the big talking points at the moment is hero talents and how they're gonna kind of play out in the War Within, and this wider conversation about whether WoW as mechanics and as literal gameplay is kind of bloated and inaccessible. What's your take on that?
So I think, so I think your read on hero talents and the comparison to Covenants is very apt and straightforward. And, like, I got caught by the Covenants thing, you know, like, I was like, the Kyrian, like, their look, the characters, like, I was like all in on that. But I was playing Druid, and when I was Resto, it was like, fine, you know, like, the difference between a Kyrian Resto Druid and a Night Fae Resto Druid was, like, not really worth addressing. And then the other two, at least in the first patch, were just absolute trash, so, like, who cares? But then we had too many healers, and I wound up going back to balance, and it was like, Kyrian Balance Druid was like, it had a, you weren't, there were worse choices. There were 2 worse choices, but it was like, but the gap between that and Convoke the Spirits, like, having, like, Convoke was just so powerful that when we, like, stonewalled on Sledge Fist, it was like, okay, well, I guess I gotta switch. Like, if we're gonna get ahead of the curve, I need to switch, because just mechanically we need the damage, and that was a lot of the problems, a ton of the problems with the power disparity in the Covenants was exacerbated by the gear is gear, WoW is hard tuning of Shadowlands raids.
Yeah.
That meant that like you couldn't really just kind of like if your priests decided that it's like, oh, I really liked this power back in Legion, I'm going to get the legendary power where my angel lets me resurrect after I inevitably die during the fight. It's like, no, that's a bad power. That's a waste of your slot. Like, that's a bad pick. You couldn't just like smooth that over. You know, it's like that person was like holding you back. And like the tuning on Sire made that viciously clear. So these kinds of like discrepancies between like this marrying of player power and class fantasy, the consequences of it can be exacerbated by other things in the game and like how difficult the content is when the breakpoints in the difficulty are. So like, you know, if the top end, if it's like the last 4 bosses of the first raid on mythic difficulty are unbeatable unless everybody has min-maxed to this degree, like, I don't want to say that's not a problem, but that's not a problem. Like that, like, okay, whatever. Like, of course that's the way that it is. And the players who are going to be engaging with that content just kind of like deal with it. And they have like their priorities are always going to be instrumental play because they're doing mythic raid. But if it ends up being a situation like Shadowlands where it's like you get your ahead of the curve kill of Sire Denathrius and then you struggle to re-clear the instance on subsequent weeks because the tuning is just so demanding that you can't carry alts, you can't carry players who are like a little bit kind of soft on the skill curve. That's real bad, and that's demoralizing, and it makes all of those choices just feel so much worse because, you know, so like in honestly, like in Amir Drasil, if somebody has a 80% kind of value talent build, like they've got a, you know, say they've got like 6 or 7 picks in there where you look at it and you're just like, not really what I would take. that's not doing what you think it's doing. Or like, you know, it's like, well, okay, you've got an ability that applies to a crowd control button that you don't push. Whatever.
I
You're
can't
probably
even imagine that. What?
No,
I can't imagine that as part of my life. What are you talking about? I literally discovered what Mindsu did like a month ago. So it's always been on my bars.
But you know, if you've got a bunch of players, like you've got a bunch of just regular players who are not necessarily like, they're not necessarily making just destructive character choices. They are trying to make their character be good at things, but they've taken cozy choices.
Sure.
You know, that are maybe like on paper 75% as effective as the like correct pick, but like it's easier for them to actually do. So if they did the correct pick, like they wouldn't be able to execute the rotation properly, and they would actually do less damage than the cozy pick. Right. If you take the cozy pick, you can get ahead of the curve.
Oh yeah.
You know,
it's right. Shadowlands was the expansion of no reclears. Like if you go back and look at my characters from Shadowlands and their sort of Warcraft logs, I think there's 1, maybe 2 kills on each of the final bosses. 1 on Sylvanas, 2 on Denathrius, and maybe 2 on Jailer as well.
She was the easier of the three.
But we were just done. We were just like, we have no desire to go back in there and do that fight ever again. And I enjoyed the fight. I thought it was good, but as soon as it was done, it was over. And I was like, well, that's my head of the curve. I'm finished with this tier. And patch and probably expansion. And it was very tough. But then it is noticeably easier ahead of the curve raiding in Dragonflight, particularly the last 2 tiers.
the last two tiers. The first one, Razagath, was very much a Shadowlands boss, and I think she actually very quickly became like the most lethal boss
Oh, I think so, yeah.
in WoW history. Definitely the most lethal of the expansion by a very very long by a very wide margin. I was really worried with how intense the tuning was on Razagath, that would carry through, but then they're like, upgrade systems, here's all of these things, like, because a lot of Shadowlands stuff, like the tuning difficulty comes to, like, you can trace it back to this sort of philosophical banishment of Titan forging and kind of gradual catch up mechanisms. I think they've really kind of like solved, like, I think the upgrade system is a solution that will stick around for years, like probably at least 2 more expansions before they feel like they need to dramatically iterate on it. But where was I going with that? Yeah, so the other two, raids 2 and 3, got a lot easier to get those re-clears. That minimizes, or like minimizes the impact of bad picks. Where was I?
Hero talents. I mean, is that going to affect? Is it going to be my worry with hero talents more than anything else? Because they were very easy to identify as like the thing that might be shit about War Within. That and delves, right? But no one's going to really care if delves are terrible. Everyone's going to care if hero talents are. And I just don't want to be that thing where it sucks all of the oxygen like out of the room, and it's all anyone wants to talk about, and it's all anyone can, like flying in WoD or Covenants in Shadowlands. Are we heading towards that? What can we do to avoid that?
Hold that thought for 1 second, because I need to go and get the kiddos, but you stick around.
I'm only gonna keep down for like another 5 minutes.
You guys chat. Okay. I'm gonna bounce. But thank you, Dan. It's always like such a pleasure to chat with you. You're amazing.
It's great chatting with you again.
Please, tell the community how to fix hero talents. We're all counting on you. Okay.
As soon as we've solved hero talents, Evie, that's it. We're fine. We're good.
We'll be here till we fix it. I don't think it's too late to excise them from one another. I think the easiest way of fixing it would be to just would be kind of what you suggested, which is just go around the problem, and pull them apart from each other. Make the aesthetic pick and make the actual talent tree just sort of like 2 separate things. And that's not necessarily like a satisfying way of doing it, but it would be a way of doing it. I honestly think the bigger risk with hero talents is that I think rather than saying that they're going to suck, would be just that they end up being a little bit lame. Right. is probably the bigger risk. I don't think the thing is that, because going into hero talents, they have been explicit about the fact that you're not really like locked into it in any meaningful way. It's not a Covenant situation where they're going to start off with this like, well, maybe in the future we'll let you switch.
Sure.
Or like, if you switch, there's going to be this whole like, it's going to be a narratively weighty decision to switch, which really just translated into okay, it will take you all weekend, like it'll take you like 3 days of just degenerate play in order to be raid ready as a night fae for reset on Tuesday.
Yeah.
That the fact that there isn't that imposition on it is going to defang a lot of it. Like that specifically generated a tremendous amount of the animus towards the Covenant choice system, yeah. Was that it's like this, that like Sure, by the end, like, because by the end of the expansion, if you were a player who was willing to go through and level all of them, by the end of the expansion, it was just kind of trivial. It was like, it's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I
Still
can
took
just
a lot of
bounce.
grinding to get there, though.
It was a lot of grinding to get there, but by the end of it, it was just, it's like, oh, I'm gonna go do some PvP. Okay, I'll just go over and get. It's like, okay, let me just flip to Necrolord real quick. Oh, we're going and doing like Mythic Plus. All right, let me grab Night Fae. Oh, we're gonna go to Raid. Okay, I'll Venthyr. It was, but there was a tremendous grind to get there, and that was also like after multiple patches of concessions about like how, when, and what was required in order to like do the switch in the first place. Hero Talents isn't coming with that sort of front-loaded barrier. So I think kind of the worst case scenario is that basically players end up with like the hero talent tree that they prefer and that they like sit in when they're in the capital city, and they use it when they're out doing like solo questing, and they will preferentially like constantly try to use it in like M plus and whatnot. And then it'll come down to whether or not tuning forces them into the other tree. But then if tuning does force them into the other tree, they'll swap when they need to. They'll resent it, but they'll swap when they need to, and just kind of like live with it. And then, okay, raid's over, immediately click back into Night Warrior or whatever, and Dark Ranger.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the biggest danger, is that it's essentially just a meh thing that people kind of roll their eyes at a little bit, and just becomes a kind of a sigh rather than.
And that interaction, I think, is really going to depend on the class. Like, it's going to come down to class communities, because like some of the class communities, what they're sort of being offered in like the naming and fantasy of these hero talents is wildly disparate from what other classes are getting, and like the choices that are being asked to being made. So there's really only a handful of classes where they're like, hey, here's this thing you've wanted since like 1995 when you were 14 and playing Warcraft 2 on Christmas Eve. Like there's really only a few that are being like dangled that intensive a bait that it makes sense to have these really intense emotions about. Whereas I think for like for Death Knight, like, sure, Rider of the Apocalypse sounds super badass, but like, what's the actual sort of like emotional weight of like, no, I want to be a Rider of the Apocalypse. Like no one's really like ride or die for it in the same way.
I'm pretty ride or die for the Rider of the Apocalypse. My hopes are incredibly high. I don't know what I want from it, but all I know is that
what is it even going to be?
I want it to literally change the color of the screen or something. I like just sort of anything. Right. I want fire to happen when I walk, and angels to sing and then die everywhere I go.
Right. But like, I'm sitting here looking at my picks, and it's like, okay, Chrono Warden, which we've gotten the preview of, and then Scale Commander, which is the pick that I haven't seen the option for yet. And it's like, do I really deeply care? Like, what's going to be even, like, what's going to be the aesthetic overhaul there? Is there a meaning? Like, will it even be like an observable aesthetic overhaul, or is it purely going to be like, okay, my dash works differently now? Like, is that going to be the main sort of substantive thing behind that choice? And so I think a lot of the classes, like, and even just specs within classes, are not confronted with this, like, dichotomous choice in the way that a few specific specs are.
Yeah, definitely. And in many ways, I'm kind of pleased that my spec isn't really as well. I think if I was hanging on for something like the Dark Ranger, the way what hero talents are can only be disappointing for them. Do you think the game is too bloated? Do you think it's too difficult for new players to get into it?
Yes and no. I think MMOs as a whole. So I've played a lot of different MMOs, and all of them are very front loaded. All of them struggle with how to onboard players into their end game. Every single one has just kind of this like this almost gulf between the leveling experience and the end game experience. I think the one that that has managed it the best as it's aged is Guild Wars 2. The leveling experience into the end game experience is very smooth, is quite well done. But even then, it's like it is still a very opaque game with a lot of like hidden decisions or decisions with like really kind of obfuscated consequences to them, and you may not feel those consequences for hours after you've made those decisions, and you might not have picked up on the vocabulary necessary to like ask other players how to fix what you're feeling. Like you pick it up like from the feel of playing the game, where you're just like, there's something about how I'm doing things where like I feel really fragile. I can kill stuff, but like if I pull two things, it gets kind of hairy, and if I pull a third thing, I just kind of fall over, and that doesn't feel right, because like earlier in the game I wasn't having those problems. So what's changed, because this has been a gradual thing over like 4, 5, 6 hours of gameplay. So all of these MMOs, like they have that. I don't want to say it's inherent to the genre. I don't want to say it's like unsolvable, but it is definitely like endemic to the genre. And I think with that, like by acknowledging that, there is sort of this like filter of like, well, players who are interested in MMOs as a genre are going to tend towards being willing, they're going to expect and accept that there might be those kinds of things, and that they might need to like seek out other information, that the genre just might be like dense. And
go further, I would say that there's an argument that kind of that extra homework and it being a kind of a puzzle to solve is one of the base appeals of the genre,
Yeah, tons and tons of players, like that's what draws them to it. That's what keeps them engaged with it. And so that's a really delicate balancing act. I think your brand new player experience can't, like, it's almost going to come down to a roll of the dice of like what class and what spec you pick is going to have this really, really dramatic impact on what that ends up like looking like, what that ends up feeling like, because you've got some classes and specs where they give you your core tools in the first like 40 minutes of play, and they introduce those tools in sort of like an order of like, okay, here's your thing that you use to build points, here's your thing you use to spend points, and then when this lights up, you make things explode. And it's like, and those are your three buttons. You hit these three at the appropriate in the correct order, and you're good. And then everything else that you're going to add on to that is just other stuff you can do, but you're never really going to stray from these three buttons. And then you've got specs that don't get core abilities until like their 40s. They get abilities in their 50s that just completely alter the way that the spec plays. And then you've got something like Evoker, where you do Forbidden Reach? No. Banished Reach?
Forbidden Reach
Upper Reach, Outer
Forbidden
Reach.
Reach is Exile's Reach is the new player island. Forbidden Reach is the
Forbidden
Evoker
Reach is
island.
the you do Forbidden, you get your
You've only done it
you
six times at this point.
I've only
Dan,
done it.
yeah.
I've only done it a whole bunch of times at this point. It's like you get. It's like, okay, you get Living Flame, you get Disintegrate, you get a heal spell, you get your breath. You get your breath weapon. You finish Exile's Reach. Here's 50 talent points to spend.
Oh, and also in the middle of that, you basically learn dragon riding as well. It's like, here's how you learn the dragon ride and the twirl and stuff.
So Exile's Reach is Forbidden Reach is going to work like really well when they like move Drakthir back down to being just like a regular spec, where it's like you get out and it's like, congratulations, you're now level 10, and then like everything else sort of like flow. But right now, you know, there's actually a really funny thing. So like they went back and changed the spec decision quest so that you can choose Augment, and they changed the quest text to acknowledge that, like to acknowledge that Augment is an option. But then they didn't and I don't blame them for this, but they didn't then re-script the actual like quest mechanics of like the follow-up to that, because like the quest mechanics are like, okay, you either heal a bunch of NPCs who are fighting baddies, or you kill baddies. And so your original decision is between, you know, devastation, kill baddies, preservation, heal NPCs. Now you can choose Augment, which just really kind of puts you on the DPS track for like kill baddies. But you can't put your buffs on the NPCs. NPCs kills don't count towards your bar tracking. Your heal spells are on like a really long oppressive cooldown, and you've only got the one, aside from like Living Flame. And you don't have Eruption. You don't have your core damage dealer. You don't have your core spender. Your core and power ability. So you're just kind of sitting there on these like really long timers, just slowly chipping stuff down because your like a core ability to the spec is like just 2 points down on the talent tree. Like you can't get it, and you don't technically have talent trees. But then like you leave the reach. And again, like you leave the reach, you do your like, it's like go to the bank, go to the portal room, go to the auction house, go up and talk to your dragon, choose your visage form. Boom! Suddenly you've got just like these piles and piles of talent points, and it's like you're literally just being handed homework of here's now 50 talent points to spend. I hope you did your research, because you don't get the opportunity to feel this out.
I feel like augmentation being made to feel like an afterthought and not quite belonging in the environment, and just having to sort of cope with the fact that everyone hates them and it's use. I think that's preparing you quite well for life as an augmentation evoker.
It is kind of preparing you, yeah. Leveling, like, and I can talk about leveling as augment because I did that for one of them. I love augment. I actually I enjoy playing it. I think it's a very interesting addition to the game. I'm going to be very sad when it gets dumpstered and just turned into earth flavored devastation. But I don't know. I kind of feel like that's just I have felt since minute one that I am riding a sinking raft. Like the moment that there is one dev on the team who has enough clout that they're like protecting augment and being like, no, we're gonna ride it out. We're gonna see we're gonna see how this plays out. We're not gonna make rash decisions. We're gonna commit to the bit we're gonna keep committing to the bit. And they are basically like keeping it safe. And then the moment that they switch teams, move on to another company, retire, whatever, it's like next patch augment is just going to be like, it's just going to be you increase your party's DPS by 1%. here and it's just going to be a very, very cooldown based damage spec, and it's going to lose everything that's cool about it and interesting. And
I think you're right. I think it's the way I think of it is it's like we're going to a party and Evie warned me that those shoes don't look very good and that they don't fit me very well. And I'm like, shut up. It's fine. These are awesome shoes and they're very comfy, actually, and they're very fashionable. And then I get to the party and they're incredibly uncomfortable and I really want to take them off, but I can't possibly let Evie be that right and to be that wrong. So like I grimly kind of hang on and stay uncomfortable for the length, even though I still think they look very cool. I'm uncomfortable. I'd rather not be in them, and I would just take them off. But I'm gonna wait until the end of the party, and then I'll just quietly never wear them again, sort of thing. It's the double down,
yeah. So Augment has been wildly disruptive. I don't think it's a bad spec. I don't think it's a bad addition to the game.
enjoy playing it, certainly.
I think it's a really fun spec, or can be a really fun spec. But it has been undeniably disruptive. In no small part because, as has been endlessly litigated, like it's the only pick for that like sub role. And like how like are the whole thing with Oracle, like, are they gonna just like embrace this and like it's like, yeah, no, we're gonna use hero talents, we're gonna create more support specs, we're gonna spread the Aug love around, we're gonna like, are they going to commit to that? Are they not? Like, what's gonna happen there? And I think the fact that they've been a little bit cagey on whether or not the Aug philosophy is gonna spread is I think contributing. People are being held in tension.
You'd see more specific support specs cropping up for the War Within, I think, if that was actually the case. I feel like the going into the next expansion and kind of the announcements and certainly the reveals of hero talents, that would have been the time to be like, oh, this class now has a support spec. This class now has a support spec. And it's not a hero talent for Disc or Holy. It's a support, like it's a whole new spec, and we're giving them to like 3 other classes, and this is a thing now. And the fact that hasn't happened would the writing would appear to be on the wall for support as a concept, I think.
So I'm very glad that there's sort of this like feeling inside of me, like I'm very glad I got to be here for this like phase where Augment was just like at its rawest, most insane version. It's kind of like when paladins get to reminisce about being able to build retribution stacks until they could like one-shot bosses.
No, I'm glad I saw it with my own eyes, because no one would ever believe it. I don't want to keep you much longer, but I just want to there's a couple of super chats that we got. One from Mego, who you met at BlizzCon as part of our posse, just saying hello, and she talks about you all the time. Gets old, actually. And also from Dragnossi as well. So, will Chris Metzen fly in, cape and all, and resurrect the now dead War with an expansion? Or are we all doomed to Shadowlands 2.0? So, I like, in terms of, just to kind of finish off your optimism about the game going forward, obviously since BlizzCon, when we last spoke, we've had some updates with Steve Danusa leaving the team, and it is very much
which we've been sitting on since November.
Some of us more successfully than others, it has to be said. But yeah, finally, would you believe it?
I was streaming and people were like, "What do you think about Danusa?" I'm like, well. Some people noticed that he wasn't around at BlizzCon, so this is not a surprise. I had a very bad poker face for that stream.
Yeah, no, it was...
anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
No, but now that it kind of is out in the open, that it's Metzen and Gregory. That's it. That's the dream team. That's what it is. And how do you feel with everything that's happened since BlizzCon, or not happened? about the World Soul Saga now, and kind of like the war within, and the direction of the game. I'm still like incredibly optimistic about everything, weirdly, and I'm actually like, the more I think about it, the more excited I get. Something I was going to touch on earlier, sorry, I just got to get this out of the way. I don't know if you picked up on this, but there is stuff happening in Season of Discovery that links into Xalatath and links into kind of Titan prisons and things like that. And so playing with this idea of, we're putting story that is building up to the war within, and we're putting it in Season of Discovery, and I love that. I think that's. I think that's. It's quite mild.
I think that's interesting. Yeah, it's they're keeping it they're keeping it pretty constrained. They're keeping it to stuff that can spread very easily.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're putting it into a video game rather than a book means that it will just inherently have better coverage and better penetration. Sure. To the degree that WoW is able to get even like 5% penetration on their on lore in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, I remain optimistic that the World Soul Saga has not been renamed like the Fell Corruption of Fell Corruption. So, we can make fun of Metzin's sort of like quirks as a writer for another 20 years, but
well, now we've got the opportunity to as well, right?
And now we have the opportunity. I think we'll see a lot of Metzin tropes, but they lovingly got us here in the first place anyway. So I kind of just have a lot of the same reservations that I had back around BlizzCon. I feel like the War Within is still not really getting a chance to flex its identity in the way that I think it kind of like deserves. I don't think it's a bad thing that they've been focusing on basically labbing hero talents with the community. Like, I don't think that that's a bad thing, but I think the sort of narrative pitch of War Within is still a little bit absent. Maybe I wouldn't feel like, I probably wouldn't feel that way if I were a bit less disconnected. Like if I were in a phase where like my WoW consumption was like very arm's length, logging in once or twice a week in order to just sort of like check in on things, and then going and like just doing something else, and not really not reading the blogs, not watching the videos, then I don't think I would notice that absence at all. It wouldn't be until probably like late spring that I'd start being like, wow, they really haven't started hyping it up yet. Like, what's going on? So I think we're still well within the range where like, it's not weird that they haven't started ramping that up. Other kind of like surrounding stuff. I'm profoundly disappointed at the dissolution of the GM department. Like that was both kind of like there's an element of it that goes beyond just the fact that like a lot of people lost their jobs. It's the jobs that it's the very specific type of job that was lost, and the work that was being done that did in fact like make WoW unique and better as a product. That you had this like internal department for customer service that had a deep knowledge about not just the game, but the ways in which players interface with the game, the expectations of the community, the community's internal language and grammar of how it like talked about the game and what it expected to like get out of it. That sort of implicit, like, okay, how is this machine supposed to behave? That is very difficult for someone to communicate in a support ticket when they're like bent out of shape because it broke.
Yeah.
That the GM department had that knowledge of player expectation and community that made them able to respond and do their jobs in a way that was exceptional. And losing that expertise, losing that, I think that does damage to the fabric of the company.
Yeah.
I think that was it was a bad choice. It was a wrong choice. Microsoft shouldn't have done it, and there will be hidden consequences that will not become apparent for years.
That makes me think of something that I've often wondered, actually, is, you know, I feel like we've got fairly similar politics. I'm not going to talk about that really, but like there's this thing where so much of your content is based around, to boil it down to its least delicate, pointing out bullshit and warning people about it as well, with your most recent work as well, whether it's kind of taking on and analyzing how someone becomes like a flat earther and where that comes from and what makes them kind of stick to that, or, you know, your more recent work with NFTs and Web3 and stuff like that. And, you know, having this game that you love and that you want to be good and that you are willing to be good and that you want to consume and enjoy, as Blizzard and the gaming industry in general has become like worse and worse and more abhorrent, and as you get older you notice how the mechanics of it work more and stuff as well. How do you square that with your other work and with your other kind of the ways you live your life generally?
I mean, it's difficult to square. I mean, in part with gaming, like if you want to play any AAA game, you either need to just like suppress it entirely and you know, go on Twitter and rant about the wokerati, like ruining games by making Tifa's boobs smaller, or whatever. Like you just become a like complete chud, or you confront the fact that like these are complicated. These are complex products that are made by committed artisans who are working within a destructive and exploitative system. And you accept that nuance and you grapple with it and you talk about it when you know, when appropriate and when opportunity provides itself. Because like they're not necessarily like unfixable problems. They're not necessarily like unsquareable circles. You know, that it is well within the realm of possibility and very much within their power for ActiBliz, Microsoft, King, Stony, Mr. Clean, Johnson & Johnson to treat their people with dignity and respect and treat them well. Like that's not an extreme ask. They can do it. They have the power. You know, they have the power to remove abusers from positions of authority. They have the power to pay people enough that they can afford to live within, you know, an hour of work. You know, I think I don't think that pressuring them in those ways, like socially and whatnot, is necessarily spitting into the wind. The sort of like the real tricky question is, it's like, well, you're consuming a subscription product that involves giving them kind of like regular drips of money. So is that undermining your own activism as you do it? And I don't know that there's a clean answer to like to necessarily like square that. I think, well, just don't play it. Like just kind of like talk about it, but don't engage with it. Like don't actually like do the thing. Don't play the game. Whatever. I think that's kind of like a trite answer. Like it's viable, but is it? I don't know. It just kind of feels like walking away in a sense. I don't think that I don't know if I explained that as well as I can. I feel like in the words that just came out of my mouth, I might have accidentally implied that there's like a moral high ground to playing WoW, when there's not.
No,
I don't think there's a.
I always like. I'm happy to completely applaud anyone that stops playing for any reason. But particularly any kind of moral reason. And yeah, no, I think it came across what you were getting at for sure.
Yeah,
it's an impossible question, which I apologize for.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's kind of an impossible question, and that's good. And I think we need to like engage with that impossible question and ramble through it in public in ways that express sort of the nuance of what we want from the world. Like I want WoW to be good and fun and a thing that I can come back to, and I want it to be an avenue of expression for artists and writers who also want it to be, they want it to be good. They want it to be a thing that they can use to put art out into the world via. And both of us, some people were really down on me for going to BlizzCon last year. They're like, "Oh, why are you supporting Blizzard?" And it's like, the main thing that I went for was
the Weekly Reset Live, obviously.
Was Weekly Reset Live, and then the second thing that I went for was a chance to interact with the employees and like meet them and talk with them, especially since like I hadn't been to BlizzCon since the last time I was just a Diablo podcaster, and with like 300 subs, and this time it's like, no, I'm a YouTuber who gets recognized, and I was really interested in being able to, and sure enough, like a lot of the staff that I ran into, like people who write quests, who script quests, who build armor, who design character options, they were like, "Oh, I've seen your stuff. I really liked what you said about this." And one, that pumps my ego, and I love having my ego pumped.
Never
because
hurts.
I'm vain. And two, like it's the people who are building this are people just like us, who are like, they're trying to get by, they're trying to make something, they're trying to like do something fun and interesting and entertaining that kind of like that connects with people. And it is unfortunate that in that all of us are exposed to needing to deal with these negative, corrupting influences of the system that we live within. And you know what? Like maybe the Fel can teach us a little something about labor organizing and structures of like how a business can operate towards the people who are almost just by necessity of logistics subordinate to others, in ways that mitigate the harms of those relationships.
It's an incredibly complex subject with lots of nuance, but I think what you're saying is Chris Metzen's going to save WoW and everything's great now.
Yeah. Everything's great now. Everything's being fixed. There will be no more fiascos, no more controversy. It's smooth sailing.
Thank goodness. I think we all deserve a bit of that. Yeah, exactly. And into the triumphant the War Within, with its very, very strong expansion identity at the moment. One thing I'm like quite looking forward to is the fact that we've got all these patches still to come before the pre-patch. And there does seem to be the Dark Heart patch 10.27, which appears to be dedicated to kind of setting the scene for the War Within and story in a way that we're not used to. So final question before we go, because I kept you far too long and I apologize for that, but you did have a lot of interesting things to say, so it's not entirely my fault. The pirate patch, what's it going to be? What is it?
Oh boy. pirate patch. I mean, more layoffs.
We all just pirate the game from now on.
We all
It's
just
private
pirate the
servers or
game from
bust.
now on. It's gonna, yeah, it's like it's just gonna be a private server ISO. I think it's going to be a rolling world event. I think it's gonna be a world event that's going to it's gonna be like Dream Surges, but it, you know, kind of or invasions or whatnot. It's going to be another crack at sort of that thing. It's going to be much more widespread in terms of pulling players to locations outside Dragonflight and outside just Kalimdor, Eastern Kingdoms. I think that's going to be probably like the thrust of it. It's going to be mostly happening in those locations, but then there's going to be some other stuff there. I think they're going to experiment with kind of building off of Love is in the Air in how do we move players around the world a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think for people who play Guild Wars 2, you're going to see a lot of like influence in there sort of creeping in the same way that like Dynamic Flight crept in. Yeah, because I think everybody wants the world to feel a little more utilized as more than just kind of like this grab bag leveling experience. And everybody is sort of feeling this sense of like, okay, having 20 years of content, 20 years of like terrain assets built is basically like a gold mine of locations and work that has been done that can be like further built upon in order to quickly create really satisfying high value content. So that's my guess, is it's going to be kind of this like it's going to be a world event that's going to be a bit more spread out to try to both utilize dynamic riding as a means of getting people around and as an incentive to like have people move around a little bit more. I don't know if it's necessarily going to like, yeah, that's my guess on it. Like that's what I think is going to be based off of sort of what I see as like the design incentives and the things that they're kind of grappling with and that they need to experiment with if they're going to move forward with that. And I think I had another thing to War Within something related. I don't know.
Well, we'll just have to have you back on the show at some time. I mean, what you're talking about with the world revamp and finding ways to live in the world could almost sound like it's been kind of playing on your mind as the topic for another WoW video on folding ideas. Is that, are we ever going to see another WoW video? Like, it's been such a joy to see you cover the game on that channel.
Okay, so we have a document open of just like, what are we going to do for the 20th anniversary? Like, are we going to do a thing? If we're going to do something, what's it going to look like? What would the subject be? You know, what would sort of the take be? How long would it, like, what would it look like? Because I really want to do something for the 20th anniversary, both as, you know, in this like conflict between business and art, both because like one, it's good YouTuber practice to like look ahead at events that are coming and plan subjects that relate to things that people are going to be talking about in order to do your job better. But then also it's kind of like, you know, it's like, yeah, like a tribute to this thing that I have now like 2 decades of history with.
Sounds good. Oh, I hope so. I think that your classic video and Why It's Rude to Suck at Warcraft are 2 of the most valuable videos in the space and 2 of the most interesting and entertaining videos in the space. And it's just great to have more stuff like that in WoW YouTube, basically. So thank you. And it's been an absolute joy hearing you talk about the game. An open spot on this show anytime you want to come on, obviously, and spout and get stuff off your chest. And I don't know, work on the routine, that kind of thing, try out new material.
Bust out a tight 5 and just work it a little bit. Yeah.
Please check out Dan Olson on Folding Ideas. Just a wonderful channel. Oh, I said you've done 2 WoW videos. Of course, there is the Dark Moon Fair Q video as well, which is an absolute stone cold banger too. So it's a trilogy right now.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on, mate. And
thank you so much
thank you to everyone who joined us for the chat as well. Any kind of hints you want to give us to the next video on Folding Ideas, or is that always under wraps?
That one normally I would just start rambling. As you saw at BlizzCon, I just talked your ear off about gold for like 2.5 hours over dinner. When you're like, what's the next thing you're working on? Normally I just like spill the beans and will like ramble. This one I'm keeping a little bit under wraps.
It just makes it all the more exciting.
But I've been the teaser would be I've been building dollhouse furniture for it.
And is this what your recent beard growth is in aid of as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and the puzzles
it
together,
involves a mountain man beard
working
and
out
dollhouse
10.26. I love it. It's awesome. Thank you again for getting up so early and joining us and letting us keep you and allowing you to do all the talking as well, which means a lot to us. Thank you. Thank you to everyone in chat. Thank you to the super chats, everyone who sort of joined in the chat. Thank you to everyone listening on Spotify and Amazon Music and all those other things, or watching the VOD of this on our second channel, Taliesin Never Tell's second channel. From me, Taliesin, and Dan Olson, and Evertel, and my kids, so I can hear downstairs now as well. Cheerio.